Okay, are we ready to get started? Hearing myself in this capacity is going to make me a little tweaky today, but we'll see how this goes. All right. So I am Stephanie Coleman. This is my face. That's Kristen Wright. She's not here today, but she's amazing. And she and I work together at the Sacramento County Office of Education. And we are uh, responsible, that's the right word, for a statewide project that we named California Includes. And we create resources to support inclusive practices across the state of California. We conducted a survey last year of over 700 people across education and outside of education to find out perceptions around inclusion and what it looks like, who's it for, all those things. And so we've been using that to build out resources to help support inclusion across the state. In addition to that, we also have spent the last year talking about the California alternative pathway to a high school diploma for students with significant, the language is significant cognitive disabilities. We don't really love that, and it's not necessary for us to say it that way. So we have begun saying with extensive support needs because it's not necessary to call out significant cognitive disabilities. That feels like a deficit lens. And in California, we don't use that statute. That's just more federal statute. So today, there are parts of this presentation that I intentionally call out because as we're building inclusion and places, oh, you're good, places of belonging and inclusion, the number one way that we can do that is actually by building accessible spaces. We heard a little bit about that during our keynote this morning. And so you're going to see some excuse me, some accessibility features today embedded throughout this presentation. And this is what we consider to be best practice for making sure that every place is accessible. No one should have to ask for some basic ways to participate and engage. And so we run closed captioning. Do you all know how to do that on Google Slides? Would you like me to show you really quickly? Okay, let me show you really quickly. So closed captioning is a feature that's embedded in both PowerPoint and Google Slides. And so when you turn on Google Slides, obviously it's running right now for me, but you see down here in this bottom corner where the numbers are, you're gonna click on those three little dots and they open up a spot that says caption preferences. And I'm gonna tell you right now, mine are set for the top extra large. It defaults to the smallest at the bottom. Why? I don't understand. But as soon as you change the text position to top and you change it to extra large, it will then be set for your Google for the rest of forever. And all you have to do is toggle them on and then they run. Um, Typically, I use a lapel mic. Oops, sorry about that. Just for my captioning because it helps to make it a more accurate caption. But when there's a speaker right above the computer, we don't have to worry about that. It's not necessary, but sometimes I swear and I'm not really swearing. So it just helps it be a little bit more accurate. Audio amplification is another key feature that we use in all of our presentations. Right now, like I said, I can hear myself in surround sound. But voice amplification should be in every single presentation meeting that we have where the space is any larger than like a kitchen table. No one should have to ask or lean in or any of those things when they need to be able to hear clearly. If you've ever been in a space where you're having to sort of lean in and you're using a ton of attention to just be able to hear, it's very hard to actually pay attention to what's going on. I have a little karaoke machine I take around with me sometimes that just helps with that. There's lots of different ways you can do that. You're going to see some visual supports today, multimodal instruction, typically not as much in this presentation, but it is built under culturally responsive pedagogy. It is universally designed, and the social emotional core competencies are built throughout. Um, my slides got changed recently. So here's the deal with the slide deck. This slide deck is built as a resource. So California Includes, we build resources for the state. So this slide deck is built as a resource for you to be able to use. So if you're in a position where you might be able to talk to and or train other people, you are welcome to make a copy of this slide deck. We just ask that you keep the integrity of those slides together. Within them, there's lots of speaker notes that you can take a look at to get more context. And sometimes we turn certain things on, sometimes they're off. And so when you look at the slide deck from the background mode, you'll see that there's like a bunch of them hidden. It depends on the audience. So we have it built to be sort of a universal support where sometimes we present to families, sometimes we're presenting to regional centers. We have the Department of who are we? DOR, I think, in a couple weeks. Anyway, it just sort of depends. And so when you see that they're not on, that doesn't mean you can't use them. It just means in the last time I was using them, I had them turned off for various audiences. Does that make sense? Um, I also present sometimes, and Kristen presents. And so sometimes we're using the same slide deck and things get turned off that would normally be on. So we're just going to roll with it today. That being said, we heard some really great things about language today, and we're going to continue that conversation here. We ask that we consider in this space the way that we talk about students. We heard how do we, in this position of being staunch believers that all students should be able to be included with their same age peers, have access to high quality education. Um, how do we move forward when we feel like maybe we're the lone wolf in the pack? And not a pack, I guess that doesn't make sense. Not a great expression that I just used. That being said, how do we do that? Well, it takes mind shifts, we know that. And the start of mind shifts come from language. When we use certain language, we unintentionally continue to build the structures and systems that keep students from being able to be actively included. And so when we look up here, we think about things like calling students special education students or SPED students or SPED kiddos. We hear that a lot. We maybe say that a lot. We may hear special education teacher or SPED teacher. We talk about things as if they are like programs rather than remembering that special education are services and supports. And we refer to things like ED class or autism classroom or the SDC room rather than calling them classrooms. And then we sometimes get into the habit of calling inclusion as if it's a thing. Like, we are the inclusion school. We're an inclusion district. What does that mean? Inclusion is a mindset, it's a belief, it's a feeling of inclusivity and belonging. I don't know how we would be the inclusion school, right? But when we say those things, we sort of absolve ourselves of the work that's required in those mindsets. And so today, I'm going to ask you to consider some shifts. We're going to start at the top. When we talk about students with disabilities, that's how we should talk about students with disabilities. Students with disabilities, they're students first, they have disabilities. It helps keep us from othering them into another group and then being able to absolve people of responsibility for them. I heard that kind of lifted today. Like, how do we make sure everybody has responsibility? Well, we start by the way we talk about students. And then the one thing that we really talked about as a statewide system of support recently was how often do we say it and it doesn't matter? Think about that. How often do we say student with disabilities when it's not in the context of any mattering? And yet we throw it out there and then we make it like it's something that it matters. So before we even address saying, in talking about a student saying, oh, this student with disabilities, why don't we just think, pause for a second in our brain and think, does it matter in the context of this story or this conversation, or are they just Joey, right? Um, So special education teacher, I'm an education specialist by trade. I'm doing a terrible job not introducing myself once again. Um, I'm a coordinator, Sac County Office of Education. 17 years as an education specialist in the classroom, only recently coming out of the classroom into this role. And the reason I ask us to not call ed specialists special education teachers is I want you to think just for a second. If you were to ask a teacher, what kind of teacher are you? You're going to have teachers say, I'm a multi-subject teacher, elementary school teacher, right? I'm an English teacher, I'm a math teacher, got lots of friends that are social science and science teachers, VAPA teachers, maybe they're a band or a drama teacher, PE teachers. What are all those things? It's the things they teach, right? The content that they teach, it's what they teach. So, what are we saying when we say special education teacher? And what could that be developing in some of the models, the structures, the systems that we create that we're trying to dismantle, but we continue to sort of perpetuate through the language that we use? So it's just a thought to maybe consider those things today as we move forward. And then remembering that special education or services and supports, they're not a placement. Kids are not square pegs that fit into square holes. They're multidimensional. Every single one is different. And so we should be looking at the services and supports needed to support them and not necessarily referencing places as if you have been given this label, this is where you go. That stops us from really looking at the strengths-based approach that is necessary for really supporting all students. Some other shifts to consider, like what do we talk about classrooms? Do we say the learning center? Do we say the SDC class? Could we just call it what we call every other classroom on campus? If we do have those self-contained classrooms, could we say that's room 4, that's room 3, that's room 5, or Mrs. So-and-so's class, Mr. So-and-so's, whatever you call it your school, it should be consistent across all students. And then thinking about inclusion as inclusive practices, accessible and universally designed instruction, classrooms and learning environments. That's where we see the truest belief of inclusion come to be. Okay, so you've got a lot of resources for the alt pathway. We have an hour for me to try and download everything that spent a year learning, and it's not going to be totally possible. But what I will tell you is we have built a lot of resources, and they're continuing to be built out around this alternative pathway so people can actually start doing it. We have some districts that are working on it. I'm partnering and helping different districts with it, but there are certain things that are really going to be beneficial for you. So the first thing is when you go to the electronic version of this home-based document, so you have it in a couple ways. You have, and I give it to you this way on purpose. This is so you get it from your phone, but that's really annoying when you want to get it from your computer. So you also have it's a bit.ly today, the bit.ly link that will take you to this document electronically. And the electronic version is the money version, okay? It is set up right now as a template preview, which means it's gonna look like this, but you're like, but I want a copy of it. Okay, up in the right-hand corner, you'll click the little button and it will make you your own copy of it. But you'll still be able to, if you don't want a copy saved to your Google Drive for whatever reason, you'll still be able to access all of the links from that very first preview. I did just recently, as in like 20 minutes ago, add the Padlet that is slowly being built out. Right now it's got, I would say it's like 2/3 of the way there, but it will continue to grow and it's got great resources from across the state on what different districts have done, what language suggestions people have used. So as I'm going across the state and we're talking and helping and supporting, we're also bringing those things together to share out because some of the things that need to happen are things like board policy. Some people don't have any board policy, and I don't know about you, but I'm a great copier, not a great original thoughter, right? So having somebody who's kind of gone through that process can be really helpful. So that Padlet, when you first click on, or when you first go to that bit.ly, because I added it just now and that's an old template, it's not going to be on there unless you make yourself a copy and then you should be able to see it. In addition to that, there are LEA and family guides to the alt pathway. We call them one pagers. If you print it double-sided, it's one piece of paper. It's 2 pages. And they are literally quick guides to understanding the alt pathway. The family guide is translated to Spanish, so there's an English and a Spanish version. And then there's also a version that's for districts, which are great resources to share with everybody within your organization. The information is almost exactly the same. I say it's almost exactly the same because we use a little less family-friendly language on the LEA version, but the info is the same. Part of what we found during our survey was that, and in talking with our family empowerment centers, is that they get really frustrated when they know things and they're like, when's the district going to figure it out? Or have you told the district the same thing? And so our goal is to ensure that all the resources are equally the equal information is on them. So if families were to look at it, they'd be like, oh, thank heavens, right? Because they have access to these presentations as well. And then you also have a quick reference guide that just shows a deeper dive. I'm going to show you at one point in the slides, but it'll give you information about the different pathways that students with disabilities have to earning a diploma in the state of California, including this alternative pathway. And it identifies like what are the requirements. It breaks it down. It's a very big sort of matrix. And so if you want even more information, the slide is really ugly because it's teeny, teeny, tiny. But the regular version, if you look out on your computer or print it, it's a much friendlier version. So all of that is available from your home base doc. So I want you to just take a second now that I've been talking for 15 minutes to think about what brought you to this work. So we've got, I don't know, 40 people in the room maybe right now. What brought you either to the work of serving students with disabilities and creating inclusive spaces and brought you to this conference, or what more specifically brought you to today's session? What is it that is your why in this work? Not just the, well, I need to know about it because it has to do with my job. Put a face to it, put a name to it. Who are you here for? And I want you to think about that for just a minute. And I want you to hold on to that as we go through the next um, 40 minutes or so. So I hope that we all are getting to the place where we imagine a world where every student truly has access to everything, inclusive of a high school diploma. And California is trying to live into that belief by this new alternative pathway to a high school diploma to ensure that our students that have been marginalized probably the most in the state actually have a meaningful way to earn a high school diploma. Um, how are we going to have a world where we are able to have the beautiful variability that exists in our world present if we continue to withhold things from groups of people for no other reason than we we just do, right? And so when we think about the high school diploma, that's something to consider. Okay, so there's a lot of historical context that come into play that's actually very interesting. There's a work group that was brought together a number of years ago and asked to give recommendations around diplomas for students with, at the time, it was more mild, moderate, or excuse me, moderate to moderate severe. Now we talk more about extensive support needs or even moderate support needs. And they developed recommendations that led to this particular statute. But also when we talk about kind of where does this where is this idea of making sure that everyone has access to a diploma, where does it come from? Um, do I have a brave person who would like to read this for us or wouldn't mind reading this for us? We do have teachers in the room after all.
The department recognizes that there is a very small number of children with the most significant cognitive disabilities whose performance must be measured against alternate academic achievement standards as permitted in 34 CFR 200.1D and 300.160C. As explained in prior guidance, alternate academic achievement standards must be aligned with the state's grade level content standards. The standards must be clearly related to grade level content, although they may be restricted in scope or complexity or take the form of introductory or prerequisite skills. This letter is not intended to limit a state's ability to continue to measure the achievement of the small number of children with the most significant cognitive disabilities against alternate academic achievement standards, but rather to ensure that annual IEP goals for these children reflect high expectations and are based on the state's content standards for the grade in which a child is enrolled.
Thank you so much. So this was a OSEP Dear Colleague letter in 2015. It's almost 10 years old now. And it really outlines where this it's not federally kind of what ideas were coming out federally around ensuring that there was access to high level learning. So we can talk about a diploma all day long, but at the heart of it, when we're talking about a diploma, what we're really saying is that we believe that all students should have access to rigorous educational standards, and that no matter whether we know if they're getting something out of it or not, that's beside the point. The point is that we believe all students can learn at high levels, and it's our responsibility to ensure they have access to high level standard aligned curriculum. So with that belief in mind, California said, okay, well, we probably need to get on this, right? So every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, has allowances for states to have diploma pathways that give their specific recommendations, and there are slides for this that I'm not going to show you today, but if you want more of that depth of information, just look at the slide deck. That give permissions to states, and the state of California said, yes, we want to do this, and that's where the alternative pathway came from. It lives deeply, excuse me, in the belief of presumed competence and supporting self-determination. We have to believe that all students are capable of learning at high levels. What does that look like? Well, what does it look like for all of us? Right? Like, I feel like I'm a pretty smart person in a very narrow subset of information. And then there's other things that I'm like, I'm out, right? I have high school children. I have two freshman girls, and I have a junior, and my girl, I have all three math levels right now in our house. So one of my girls is an IM1, the other's an IM2, my son is an IM3. I can help IM1. And then they're like, Mom, Lexi's like, Mom, I really need math help. And I look at her and I smile and I'm like, what are you learning about? And then she says it, and I'm like, cool, wait for dad to come home. Austin doesn't even ask me anymore. He doesn't even ask his dad. And Michael's very good at math, but he's like, that's what tutoring's for, dude. And I'm like, yeah. Right? So what is high levels? Well, it is contextual, right? And we still believe that everybody can learn at high levels. And yet we fall short oftentimes when we're talking about students with significant cognitive disabilities. And a lot of that lies with being unable to meaningfully communicate, right? So there's this lack of presumption of competence when people don't have an ability to communicate verbally as we would maybe in society, those ableist mindsets think is the way to communicate. And then we start to fall short of believing that there's high levels of thinking, and because the communication piece is a challenge. So the alt pathway is really grounded in a belief that students should have access, no matter what, to high levels of academic instruction and content knowledge, and also that we should be supporting self-determination and helping students be able to choose what they want for their lives and not tell them what their life is going to be. So I want you to take a minute to hear from Otto. How many of you went to the SIP conference last year, supporting inclusive practices? Anybody? Oh, okay. If you didn't, you can go to the SIP website and they archive their conference because it's virtual. And the Mod Squad, MOD, the Mod Squad, of which Otto is part of, they were a keynote last year, and they're amazing and really cool to listen to. But I want you to hear from Otto. He was a winner of a contest, and so this is the video acceptance, basically, of that award. But I want you to listen deeply to what he has to say. And I highly, highly encourage you to look up Otto and listen to his story in more depth, because it is impossible to not take a step back and want to reconsider what we think about presumed competence when we hear the story that he has to share. And we're going to see if it's going to work. Hopefully it does.
Hello, viewers. Welcome to Where the Magic Happens. I'm Otto Lana, the winner of the graphic novella category for my acrostic Scrabble. You gotta hold it though. Start over. Hello, viewers. Welcome to Where the Magic Happens. I'm Otto Lana, the winner of the graphic novella category for my acrostic Scrabble poem, Freedom is Not a Game. This is my voiceover actor and brother, Addison. We are decade-delayed twins. Just look at this photo when he was my age. See the resemblance? I communicate in several ways, either through someone reading the words I have written in silence, or listening to Addison read my words to others, like right now, or my iPad and the voice through a computer-generated Australian man. My Australian man voice will read the description of my poem, and Addison will read the actual acrostic poem. Thanks to Jen, Lindsay, and all the Kids Right judges. It's an honor to be a part of this program. Freedom is Not a Game by Ottawa. Freedom, fragility, responsibility, education, equality, democracy, opportunity, marginalized.
45 years ago, President Gerald Ford signed the law which allows me the freedom to receive an education as a disabled person. The fragility of this freedom is evident in that I have to prove my presence in this classroom is appropriate, year after year. I have to prove my placement and my academically rigorous curriculum is appropriate, year after year. I am threatened with a change in placement despite demonstrating academic success, year after year. With the emotional and financial toll this battle consumes year after year, we can definitely say, freedom isn't free. With freedom comes responsibility. We must make sure that freedom guarantees access to everyone. Democracy allows our freedom to vote and to exercise our opinions which shape our legislature and the laws that govern us. As we discover marginalized populations who are denied equal access and opportunities, we can right these wrongs with our collective voices to our elected officials. This acrostic poem on a Scrabble board is to evoke a sense of irony because freedom is not a game. It is serious business. Thank you. Thank you.
So I think of how lucky we are to hear from Otto and hear his thoughts, especially knowing his background and the fact that it took him until nearly high school to have meaningful access to communication, and the depth that his poem and the meaning behind it have, knowing um, the length that it takes for him to be able to communicate that, and I'm deeply grateful for it. I would love for you to pause for a moment and think back to your own high school experience. Right, right at that time when you were kind of your senior year, or maybe your junior year, or maybe your senior year plus, whenever it was, right? You were getting ready to graduate. What did it mean to you and your family? And go ahead and turn and chat with a person near you. Just like, what were you feeling? What was the energy? What was like, how did high school, like, what was it in your experience? Was it a big deal? Was it not a big deal? Were you excited? Were you like freaking out? Like, what was going on? Find somebody that you are nearish enough that you can chat with, and we're gonna do maybe like 3 or 4 minutes. So make sure to share some airspace with people. If we can come back together in about 10 seconds or so. All right. Do I have a couple brave people who would be willing to share, like with the whole group? I have educators in the room, so this is much less like when I'm teaching Sunday school at church and I'm up there by myself and no one wants to talk, right?
Hi. My name is Jace. I use they them pronouns. Also, it's very weird to hear myself talk. Uh, yes. So for me, graduating meant a lot. It meant the world opened up for me. I think for me, I really kept trying to go towards that graduation because I knew once I got into college, I could figure out a lot more things, right? My freshman year of college, I annoyed the heck out of the school psychologist to be like, please test me for autism, and she did not believe me because I was like an AP student. I did well socially, well, relatively, and I remember I did the psychological battery of tests. There's the tests where you have to read emotions, and I got that test back, and it's the first time I have failed a test. I got in the 99th percentile, which meant I did 99% worse than all the people who did that test. But I wanted to fail that test, right? It meant I could like finally be secure in how I identify, and it really just helped explain how I viewed the world. So
Thank you. Um, I wish you had gotten that sooner, right? Your experience maybe might have been different. Do I have someone else that would be willing to share?
My colleague and I were sharing, like, we have very similar stories. My dad grew up in a heavy Mexican family, really like machismo family. Women stay home, have babies, and he was here with two girls in ever-growing Silicon Valley, and he really wanted us to be able to have competitive jobs. Not that he dismissed stay-at-home moms, but he wanted us to have options. So he put us through private school while him and my mom working many jobs. Sometimes we were really poor. Sometimes we were doing well. So just seeing their hard work. So graduating from a private school as the first girl from them, that was what that meant. And so, yeah.
So much. Do I have anyone else who wants to share? No? All right. Sometimes graduation, and I would say for many people, earning a high school diploma and graduating is a foregone conclusion. Um, we, I know for my own children, like we don't have questions around whether they're earning a diploma or not, right? My IM3 son is really struggling in US history and math right now. And he has D's in both of them. And we talked yesterday and he's like, I know, mom. And I'm like, what do you know, son? Right. And he's like, I know, and I'm working on it. And it's not the end of the semester yet. And I said, and summer school is an option, right? And he said, yes. And I said, okay. And he goes, I don't want to do summer school. But it's the acknowledgement that if he doesn't pass, he's taking summer school because the expectation is that he's going to earn that high school diploma, right? And for many students, that is the expectation. I would say for most students, we don't have conversations in school with when the counselors sit down to do courses of study, they don't say, "Are you planning on earning a high school diploma?" That's not how that happens, right? It's how are we going to get there? What are we going to do? What do you need to do? Well, we know that students with extensive support needs have not been considered for that at all. It hasn't even been an option. And so it's such an exciting time to know that not only is this an option, it is the option for all students. We shouldn't have to continue to have conversations around whether a student's going to earn a certificate of completion and be on a certificate track or a diploma track. There is an option for every child to earn a high school diploma. And the conversation about a certificate, if that's even an option, should not come before we've done everything we need to do to give them the opportunity to earn a high school diploma. That is the discussion, right? Imagine how wonderful it will be to live into the idea of true equity for all by not having to have this conversation in second, third, fourth grade with parents to say, I just want to break it to you easy now. Your child's probably going to be on a certificate track. Do you know how appalling that is to me to think about having a conversation with a 6-year-old and saying, they're never going to earn a diploma? Right? Like that shouldn't happen. Well, now it doesn't have to happen ever, ever, ever. And it shouldn't be happening. And the only time we should be having that conversation is by the time that child is turning 22 and they have not been able to successfully have all of the coursework needed. But the onus of providing them that opportunity for coursework falls on us as schools and districts and county offices and every other place that students learn from. So let's jump into this a little bit more deeply. I'm going to tell you a couple things that are just important to note. There is an updated piece of the statute. So the original statute was Ed Code 51255.31. Could they just put names to things and make them right? Okay, so there was an update that's now 0.32, and it hasn't been as well lifted as it could be. And so I'm just going to tell you what it means, because I think most of the time that's what we really care about, right? Like we just want to get the down and dirty, like what does this mean? Here's what it means. Students with exceptional needs who are in high school. So the update was to allow all students. Originally, it said they had to be in high school by 9th grade in the 22-23 school year. And so any student that was already in high school, like they were entering, so for the freshmen of the 22-23 school year, were how the statute was written. And then everybody who came into high school after them, right? So like the 8th grade, 7th grade, so on and so forth. The update said if they were in high school, in the 22-23 school year. So they could have been a sophomore, they could have been a junior, they could have been a senior, they could have been, in transition in higher, we have till 22. So whatever those, I don't know what everybody calls those years. I don't think we call them 13, 14, 15. That'd be kind of weird. But transition age youth. All students are eligible. And so what's going to happen is after this group, the 22-23 school year kids go all the way through being 22, that part of the statute is going to fall off. But it's in the meantime, we have like double statute just to make it clear. Does that sort of make sense? It doesn't make sense, but does it make sense? Yeah, okay. It's necessary, definitely necessary, right? Okay, so those that it identifies the group of students. So any kids that were in high school or have entered at high school since the 22-23 school year, attending a school district, a county office of education, a charter, or a state special school can graduate from high school through a newly defined diploma pathway by meeting the following criteria. As referenced in the IEP. So we need to identify that this is the pathway that they'll be utilizing in their IEP. 1, to meet eligibility, the student has to meet eligibility to take the California Alternative Assessment, the CAW. They have to meet eligibility for that. If they don't meet the CAW eligibility, this particular pathway is not available, okay? So when I say that, I know a lot of people immediately do what I did and go to, but what about the students that don't meet eligibility but still they still need support? This is not that presentation. And there's lots that districts can do, but I'm just going to have to say we're going to put a pin in that. And there's work being done. If you want to take a note, write down ALT, A-L-T, means, MEANS.org. That's a website that's being developed with West Ed and the CDE to help with that group of students that we all go, but right? And we kind of fall short. So go ahead and take a look at that website as well. I should add that to the home base document. More things to think about. Okay, so if they're eligible for the CAW, then they are now eligible for the ALT pathway. Okay, that is how they are eligible for the ALT pathway. The next piece is the responsibility of schools. A kid does not have to show that they can do this. Remember, just have like a brain worm that every time you think of this, you think of Otto, like proving themselves year after year. We don't do that, right? If they meet eligibility for the CAW, they're eligible for the all pathway, which means that then they have to have an opportunity to complete standards aligned coursework to meet the minimum state requirements for graduation, the state's graduation diploma requirements, okay? So we need to make sure that they have access to standards aligned curriculum in the 13 courses that are required for a state diploma. Okay, so how many of us know that there's an alternative pathway for foster youth, for military families, for migrant families, right? This is another pathway. Falls in the same thinking, right? So are there eligibility factors to be able to be eligible for those particular pathways? Yes, same thing. There is eligibility category. They have to be eligible for the CAW. Some people ask, well, why? Because it's not easy to like evaluate under the federal statute having a significant cognitive disability, but the federal government accepts that as, does that make sense? Like the CAW is a way that we commonly use to identify students that need that level of support. And so it was the cleanest way to make sure that we are not over identifying students that are eligible for this particular pathway. It should be 1%. It should not exceed 1%. We should not see a big boom in the number of students eligible for the CAW. That we keep those same factors that we have used to determine eligibility in the past. And if they're eligible, then we make sure that they have access to standards aligned curriculum for those areas. And I'm going to show a slide in just a minute of what those look like. There are 2 slides that have the statute because sometimes it's hard to find. So I'm not reading them. We are not reading these teeny tiny words, but I wanted you to know that it is in the slide deck. So if you want to look at the full statute, it is available. And the title is actually hyperlinked to where you can find it on the CDE website. Okay. In March of 2024, so just this past March, CDE sent out guidance on the ALT pathway, and we see a lot of people who have read this or looked at this. Have you seen it, looked at it? Okay. This has not been since the most recent update to statute. So they're just know that it might be helpful, but it also isn't necessarily as current. And we're hoping that there'll be some updated guidance in the near future. But there's also a link for these in your home base doc as well as in the slide deck. Okay, so this is a cute little preview of what the family guide, is that the family guide? Yeah, the family guide looks like. The LEA guide looks very similar, but I finally changed the picture so it wasn't confusing to everybody thinking it was the exact same one. And like I said, there is an English version and a Spanish version available for families. And it just identifies all of the things that we should consider and the like what courses are required for the ALT pathway, who's eligible, and this has been updated with the most recent statute. So know that the link that you have takes you to a folder where the PDFs live. If you keep that link to that folder, anytime statute gets updated or anything gets updated, we get new guidance, we update these and they go back into that folder. So they'll always be the most current version if any updates happen. All right, so what are the state requirements? The state requirements for English are 3 years of English, 2 years of math, 2 years of science, a physical and a life, 3 years of social science, which include world, US, and government and econ, a class in visual and performing arts, world language, or a CTE, career technical education course, and 2 years of PE. Most districts, as we know, have either adopted A to G requirements, which are the college, like the UC and CSU requirements for students to have. And so those are above and beyond, right? So if they look smaller, just know that like some of them, there's no PE, it's in addition to the states. Does that make sense? So we don't double, we're not adding, it's not additive. So it's not 3 + 4 is 7 years of English, no. But just know if the number is larger on the state, it is required as part of the A to G requirements. Does that make sense? Okay. So as you can see, most districts choose to adopt board policy that add additional requirements. Now, I don't want you to think what the intent is to just say every student who's taking, who's eligible for the CAW and is going to be on the ALT pathway, we're just going to cut them only down to these 13 and that's all they should take. Is that presuming competence? Certainly not. And are there a lot of courses that would be probably very high interest that they would want to take that are going to be above and beyond English, math, right? There's not always the most exciting for everybody. Science is usually a little bit more exciting. But there may be other courses that they would like to take, and this does not exempt any of that. It just means that they're not required to have those courses. And if it's going to take more time for them to be able to get through those 13 required courses, that's all that is required of the alt pathway. How are we doing so far? Okay? Okay. All right. So what are some questions that are important to kind of consider as we're thinking, okay, I can get on board this. I understand. I think this makes sense to me. But what should we be thinking about? Well, as an IEP team, we need to think about, is the student's learning aligned with grade level academic standards regardless of the setting? Um, we sometimes get into the habit of some bad practices with IEPs where we say, oh, we're going to mark the box on the IEP that says that we are reporting progress not on district, right, like grades, but we're only reporting progress on goals. And then there's like 7 or 8 goals, and that's what we work towards. Is that presuming competence? Is that setting any standard for us as educators to believe that students should have access to the standards that all their peers have access to? That the things that peers are learning about that we say are so important that we have made them standards, that we don't make those things that we think all students should have access to. We fall short of really saying all, which means that a standard, like the standard practice, is not really a standard practice at all. So considering that, how do we make sure that we're actually ensuring that we're not falling short of just saying they only need to make progress towards goals? If the goals aren't inclusive of the standards aligned curriculum that we believe all students should have access to, the ideas, the concepts. And that OSEP letter does a good job of saying, do we think they're going to maybe have the breadth and depth? Not necessarily. But if I'm going to read a picture book in a classroom with students that are in high school, why would I not be reading a picture book that is about Macbeth? Right? Why would I not be showing them a beautiful science book that has images of the respiratory system and talking about those things? If I really don't have presumed competence and I just think that I'm there with a student who's not understanding it, does it hurt to show them high levels of academic instruction? No, that falls under that presumed competence. And what is it? I have a slide and it's not on here right now. Least dangerous assumption, right? The least dangerous assumption that unless we have definitive evidence, that we should always presume the highest level of competence, because the opposite of doing that is to actively cause harm. So how do we do it? Well, we think about the things that we're doing right now and think, how can this be standards aligned? How can we make sure that's happening? Are we making sure that all staff are designing their curriculum and instruction under the tenets of universal design? That by the design of their instruction, they're planning for students that need the most support and the most extension. Because it's really hard for teachers to have this idea of having students that have been excluded from their classrooms forever. They've never had a student who has extensive support needs, and now we're saying, hey, you know what? Our education specialists cannot possibly teach 13 different classes, and you teach biology. And guess what? Our students need access to biology, so you're going to have a student in your class this year, and how are we going to build and design if they haven't been universally designing any of their instruction? They get very afraid, and rightfully so, right? Like they don't feel qualified to do all of that. And that's fair. But what's more fair is that we create equitable systems where our classrooms are designed for every student and we build upon that framework to ensure access. And then an education specialist can bring their specialty to come in and say, hey, Here's the magic dust that I have that I'm going to sprinkle over this to say, I noticed that there could be a barrier here. There could also be barriers here. How could we maybe tweak this or increase access here? And guess what? Without exception, by building and designing for students that have more exceptional needs, we are going to see access for all students increase in those classroom settings. Was the most inclusive environment considered? This is another bad practice that we get in as going through the motions of very busy days and having a lot and way too much to do. I know I fell into this pattern as much as anyone else. How often do we actually spend meaningful time having a discussion around LRE in our IEP meetings? Or do we just say, things are going fine, let's keep going, right? Like, how often are we actually saying, okay, this is the student's strengths, these are their high interests, these are the things that they're really going to be heavily engaged in, they're going to need support, what barriers might exist, and how can we overcome those barriers in the least restrictive environment? We have to start having those conversations in real and meaningful ways. The high quality IEP team down in East County, SALPA, has been developing resources and kind of a new IEP template around strengths-based approach to IEPs. It is a beautiful, beautiful tie-in to how we can make this happen in a more meaningful way and give kind of guidance to like, how do we rethink about the way we've been doing things for a while? Their resources are really wonderful and they're building them out every day. So high quality IEP, if you just look it up on the internet, it'll pop up for you. And then do families know that their kids can get a diploma? Have we started having those conversations? Because I can tell you the families, like the empowerment centers, they know. They're talking to families. So if we're not talking to families, what kind of environment is that kind of creating for our families? And maybe we need to get, our chops about us so we can feel more confident in having these discussions because families do know and it comes off so much more collaboratively, like we actually want to have them be part of a discussion when we're bringing this up and not just quickly saying, oh, that's not something we're doing right now because we're not ready for it. We're never going to be ready for it, my friends, but it is law. And so we have to do something about it. And it's a good thing that it's a law. I say that and then I'm like, I don't want people to think I think, no, it's great. It's fabulous. All right, so here's some questions. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I want you to know that they're available for you to think through this process. Like, what should school teams start thinking about? Well, there's lots of things you need to start thinking about. And I am working very slowly on a toolkit that my hope is that it's going to be a toolkit that districts can sort of take a look at where are you starting and then what could be your next step. I'm hoping to have it ready by January, and I'll put it on this home-based document when it's ready. So if you make a note to check back on the original link for the home-based document in January, all of a sudden it'll be there. I might even make it like sparkly so everybody really notices. I don't know. But everybody's in a different place. So people come and they call me, they email me, or they come to sessions and they want to talk afterwards and they're like, where do we need to start? I don't know where you are, right? So if you currently have students that have been in a separate setting that would meet the eligibility for this and they don't even get transcripts, start there. That is a real thing. And if you're like, oh, good, okay, check. We've got that done. Awesome. If you have students that would meet this eligibility that currently have a transcript, but what it says on it is ILS class for all of their day, you need to write course descriptions, you need to get course codes, and that's a big job. That's not a small job, that's a big job. That's going to require you talking with your curriculum instruction team to help that's their process, right? To walk through that process. That may require you to be looking at adopting curriculum to support. I do want to say one thing. I'm not going to tell you what curriculum to buy or not buy. Do I have opinions? Yes, I do. But I'm not going to tell you which one to get or not get, or is this one going to work or not. What I am going to say is every single student in your school should have access to the adopted curriculum for your district. Every child should have access to the board approved curriculum for every single one of those 13 courses. Now, that's really hard for people that are not comfortable, right? So as an ed specialist, I taught lots of things. And I taught lots of things really poorly, and I taught lots of things really well. It depended on what I was good at, right? I'm a social science major. You give me history, solid. I might get the dates wrong, but people really love history after I'm very enthusiastic, right? I can do English pretty well. You heard about math. If it's like pre-algebra or, foundations, IM1, I can pull it off. I can pull it off. Anything after that, it's not going to be good, right? But the only way that I could improve in my practice was meaningfully having collaboration with content specialists. They are content specialists for a reason. I can do a lot of things as an ed specialist. I really do think that there is something magic about the way that we see the world, but it doesn't mean that we have the content knowledge to understand how to even do standards aligned. So if we think of a 12th grade English standard, we're going to go here, do it backwards, and then you're like, we're going back in time the wrong way. Okay, 12th grade English standard. If you look at it, you can actually tie it all the way back to kindergarten. Guess what? I didn't know that. I had no idea. As an ed specialist, they're not sitting us down and having us go through all of the content areas to learn about the standards. We don't have time for that. We had to get all of our magic tools, right? So it wasn't until I was meaningfully collaborating with the English team and being invited to the English trainings that I was like, hold the phone. What you're saying is that this, if I need to understand where it comes from, I can like just walk back in the standards and see it back here, and then I know where I'm going. It makes all the difference. And so as we're building new structures and systems, whether we're still having ed specialists be teaching in self-contained settings or not, we have to figure out ways to increase collaboration. And it goes both ways. I've done this for a long time. I ran a very large department at my last setting where we had 14 mild mod ed specialists, 5 ESN ed specialists, and like 25 instructional assistants. It was a very large school. We had 365 kids that had IEPs on our campus. So imagine managing all of those pieces that go together, right? When we first said all mild mod ed specialists need to be going to their departments for the classes that they serve, like for the student, the content area they serve, they were like, what? I have IEPs to write. What are you talking about? And I was like, you're teaching math? You need to go and talk to the math department. The math department talks to each other all the time because they need to make sure that they're like on it, right? You're teaching math. You need to go to the math department. And English teachers, you need to go to the English department. As we started co-teaching, whatever you were co-teaching, you would go to that department. And at first, the content teachers were like, why are they not at their own meetings? But it didn't take very long for the content teachers to be like, holy crap, I can bring this unit and I could be like, I'm so excited about this. And they're going to poke all the holes in it, but really nicely because they're like the nicest people. And they're going to tell me all the ways that I could fix this. And it's going to be good for all of the class. Heck yeah. And the ed specialist is like, oh, I hated Macbeth. I really do love Macbeth. So that's why I always use it as my example. And I'll tell you why. Because when I was teaching 12th grade English, and Macbeth was the time, right? I made sure that we had the graphic novel of Macbeth, and the graphic novel, by the way, is still Shakespeare, like still the same way, like it's the same. It's just got pictures to support it, and I made my 12th graders perform every day. And at first they were like, what are you talking about? Now, my students had been, like most students, tracked for all of school, had been together forever. We had 2 middle schools that fed into our school, but a lot of them even went to the same elementary schools with each other. So by senior year, they were a tight group, to say the least. And they had never been asked to do anything like perform Shakespeare. When I was not ready to do the next day, they were ready to do the next day. And it was beautiful to see them lean into it. And if you haven't had someone perform Macbeth as seniors, it's the, y'all, if you don't remember the story, there is so much high school drama in that play that it is like, it's amazing. So, how do we make sure that that's happening? We have to make it a priority, and we can't just set it up. We can't just say you're going and not give any background of why are we going? Because if you don't, that's what they say. Why are we going? And so you have to help them understand the benefit and set up kind of some structures. And the beginning may just be like, hey, let's get to know each other a little bit better. I don't understand what it means to be an ed specialist. I just see you running around all the time. You look tired. And you always ask me to go to meetings. And the ed specialists are like, I always have to ask you to go to the meetings, right? So it may take a little bit of capacity building, but it's so necessary to ensure that no matter what's happening, whether we have students that are having the benefit of inclusion, and it is a big benefit, and that should be our North Star, or we still have teachers teaching in a separate setting. In order for kids to have high quality instruction, they have to have high quality instructors, which means our ed specialists need support. They are not trained in content. I need you to hear that one more time. They are not trained in content. Some, correct. We do have some dual credentialed people that would be the exception to the rule. You are right. Thank you, dual credentialed people who are like, wait a minute, I am. Thank you. Thank you, team. Thank you, team. Thank you, team. But especially when we're talking about secondary with like the diploma, for sure not, right? Like I told you, I have a social science degree. So technically I have my content, I have content mastery, but I didn't go to school to learn the standards. Like I didn't spend any time on that kind of thing. And so we do need to think, but thank you, because that is totally true. And I don't want to negate all of the amazing dual credentialed friends out there. All right, so we're not doing breakout rooms. We're not going to do that. Okay, this is SS. See, I'm like so far behind. All right, here's the pathway. Guess what? Here's state, here's alt pathway. It's the same. This is that document that I told you about that's really teeny tiny, but it's going to be really helpful for you to look at. What is, like, who's eligible? What are the requirements, accommodations, blah, 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 for a high school diploma A to G, a traditional high school diploma, which really just means like a high school diploma, potentially like state standards, because that's traditional, right? Just what everybody can expect is embedded in whatever added requirements districts have. Then we have the expanded options for specific youth. So those are those youth groups that I said, do we know all these people have? Yes. And then finally, the alternative pathway to a high school diploma. So I know I'm skipping a lot of slides because I kind of talked over them. So some of the things that teachers are going to need is a better understanding of what is standards aligned curriculum. What does that mean? It means that we know that there are certain things that at grade level we expect students to know. It does not say mastery. It does not say proficiency. It just says they need access to standards aligned curriculum. And we shouldn't be giving 5th and 6th graders a first grade reading book because they're reading at first grade. That's not appropriate, and it doesn't align to the standards. So how do we do that? Well, there's some tools that are available. The CDE has them posted, and these are available in your home-based doc, but also in the slides. There's dynamic learning maps. There's the NCSC guide. They're just guidance. And then on the Padlet that you have to update, like refresh your home-based document to get. The Padlet also includes some work that Mount Diablo has done. They've done some really great work sort of identifying what are the main standards for each grade level and what would that look like at different, different strands, basically, the depth of how deep they go. And so that's available on the Padlet and can be really helpful. But again, collaboration between content specialists and education specialists is going to be really necessary to help understand, unpack, and not lower the expectations and the bar. Keep that bar high, but figure out what supports are going to be needed for students to get there. A course of study is going to be a really important key step. I have like 6 minutes left. How do we create them? Well, I'm going to give you a positive. Every student in high school is supposed to have a course of study. My girls didn't get to pick their classes for their freshman year until they did the online whatever thing that was, and they had every single thing planned out for all 4 years. They weren't even in high school yet. They didn't know what half those classes were, right? But it's a requirement that every student has a course of study, except we don't always do that for all students after all, right? So the good news is there's already like a procedure for this that's in place for students that have been having them, right? Any student that has been on a traditional or district diploma path would have one of these. And so our counselors are very familiar with creating courses of study. With students who are eligible for this pathway, our intention is not to belabor it until they're 22. What do I mean by that? It's 13 classes. We should not be stretching it out until they're 22. We should be trying our best to get those classes done in the same period of time as their same age peers. They can continue until they're 22. I did not say that, and I need to say that because I clearly did not say that today. It does not end their offer of FAPE. Okay, so let me just say that again. If they earn this diploma, 12th grade, through this pathway, it does not end their offer of FAPE. Okay, did I say that clear enough? Because that's like a really important thing. That is different than we have seen in lots of other times, and so I want to make sure that that's clear. Let me show you a couple quick examples of what a course of study could look like. White, state requirements, yellow, everything else that we work on with students, right? Some of their living skills, maybe some of their career and college awareness, some of those communication or transition planning. So white classes, and this is just what's required in the 4 years. The white classes are the ones that are going to meet those state requirements and ways that it can be done. So here you see modifications in like the English classes, maybe in general education. This is just an example. For math, maybe we have co-taught or separate setting for those courses. In science, maybe we've got some co-teaching going on, history, co-teaching going on. This is obviously a more inclusive course of study, right, option. But what you see is there's still lots of time, even in 4 years, to work on the other skills that we think are very important to make a well-rounded whole child. Um, when you look at this, when you look at it from your side, this is on top in the slide deck. It's just to tell you what's the intent before these classes, if that makes sense, like what I just said around the inclusive model using co-teaching. This is another example. It's only pink to make sure you know it's a second one. Pink is the state requirements. White are those state requirements being met in alternative settings, in fundamental settings, whatever your district calls things. It could be lots of different things. And then a third one. So these are all just potential ways that in 4 years a student can earn the high school diploma. They could continue. If you look at freshman year like I do and your soul dies a little bit, and then your sophomore year, your soul dies even more because these poor children have like no opportunity for anything that they want to choose. And then all of a sudden they have one class they have to meet their senior year. How does this make any logical sense, my friends? Um, just know that there is flexibility. There can be flexibility. This would be especially if we have students that have not had, thank you, a lot of opportunities for standards aligned curriculum. This might be really overwhelming in 1 year. And so there is definitely flexibility. We can flex, but we just want to keep that true North Star in mind. Like, can we try the best we can to get this done in 4 years? And maybe over time, as we start planning to not have students in 3rd grade be on a certificate track, by the time they get to high school, this isn't going to be too rigorous because they've been experiencing high quality, rigorous instruction all along. So when we align systems, like I talked about, it depends on your role, it depends on where you're at, but just know that students are going to need transcripts to earn a diploma, just like they always do. right? So we need to make sure that that's happening. Um, this slide really just talks about if you're wondering where your next step is. There's a bunch of like, where could I jump in? My hope is that each and every one of you will do one thing. And one thing doesn't feel like a lot, but you are one piece of a bigger system. And if everyone in your system that has the power to change does, we don't just have one change. We have a chain reaction of changes that happen. If your district level start looking at transcripts or looking at course descriptions or looking at curriculum, and you start having conversations in IEP meetings about where the least restrictive environment is, and you start making sure as an administrator that your collaborative time is shared collaborative time, think of how much change would happen in 1 year from all of those pieces happening. So your takeaway is, what are you going to do? And maybe what you're going to do is share resources to start with and have some conversations. But my hope is that you leave today knowing this is happening, right? It's in place. We should already be moving on it. This isn't an opportunity to say we didn't know. We do know. It's the law. So we need to start moving. We need it, the opportunities need to be there. Whatever your system currently looks like, you have to have opportunities for students to be working towards standards aligned curriculum towards these requirements. Whatever that's going to look like, it needs to be happening. And not like next year, like now, i.e., no later than the start of next semester. Have some things in place that can shift to make sure that this is happening. Okay. You have my contact information in lots of different places. I am happy to talk with you or answer questions. As my time allows, I can Zoom with you if you need somebody to talk to, and I can provide you any more resources that if you see something and you're like, I need more of that, I can try and connect you with that. So thank you all for being here. It's encouraging to see people here because I know that's going to equate to change for kids. So thank you so much for your time. Oh, and if you like to do surveys, I love when people do feedback surveys. So there's a bit.ly. I would love any feedback you have. Or if you want me to connect with you at the end of this feedback, you can put your information in and say, email me about, and give me a little more information about what it's about, and I will happily connect with you.